Now, following an outpouring of sadness after the murder of Conservative MP Sir David Amess, his colleagues from across the Commons have been raising concerns for their own safety. And one common thread has emerged: the amount of abuse politicians face online. The Home Secretary Priti Patel said the government's online safety bill would offer the opportunity for all MPs to come together to close the corrosive space online where we see such dreadful behaviour. But how relevant is this to the killing of Sir David? How relevant is online anonymity, which is the issue that seems to be now at the forefront, to that terrorist incident? Well, let's speak now to Baroness Claire Fox of Buckley, the founder of the Academy of Ideas. Claire Fox, welcome to the programme. I worry about this because whenever we see a tragedy that is in no doubt a tragedy, we often see legislators jump at, I don't want to sort of say that excuse, but see it as a pathway to pursue policy they already wanted to see, and pretty a liberal policy at that.
Well, it was interesting when you were kind of explaining what the response was, because it just feels like a complete non sequitur. I mean, there is nothing that indicates that Sir David was murdered by an online troll, somebody he'd been receiving abuse from. We're all kind of looking at this and thinking, what are they talking about? As far as we know, and innocent until proven guilty, all of the indications are that this is part of an Islamicist-inspired terrorist attack of some sort. A topic, by the way, which we refuse to discuss in public. Very frequently, politicians shy away from talking about it, fear that they'll be accused of Islamophobia, too difficult, too awkward. But actually, I mean, 40 people in the last 5 years have been killed by Islamist terrorist attacks. That should be on our lips. And we go to online anonymity. What are we talking about?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm generally very concerned that the genuine outpouring of, civil support for MPs, people saying Sir David was a fantastic constituency MP, people thinking maybe we should think about the way we treat MPs, going to turn to cynicism if then politicians start using this terrible, it's not even just so much a tragedy, this brutal murder, as a way of pursuing the online safety bill, which is an egregious and draconian piece of legislation that bears no relationship to the murder.
Do you think to some extent it is because MPs and politicians are scared about talking about the real problem that exists in this country of Islamism, of political Islam, not the private faith that people can hold, but the idea that they want to push that faith onto society as a whole, as a social, as a political order? Are politicians too scared about talking about that?
I mean, it seems all the indications are that every time anything happens, I mean, it's not just in this instance, even after the Manchester bombing, which was, such an atrocity, there was a real reluctance. It was like, calm down, everyone. It was as though if we talk about it, it's going to lead to sort of anti-Muslim pogroms, whereas actually many Muslims want to discuss this in the community. I mean, they're not frightened of the debate in the same way that politicians are.
And after the killing of Joe Cox, everyone was talking about the far right in this country, and rightly so. It's a significant threat. It's not as big a threat as Islamism.
No, it is true.
And we were rightly talking about it.
Well, we were talking about it, but if you remember, I mean, what we were wrongly talking about in a way was the kind of the way that it moved from far right to Brexit was what did it. I mean, I did some of the big media programmes at the time, and on the BBC and so on. And I mean, it was horrible the way that the terrible murder of Joe Cox became far right. It's all to do with the Leave voters, Brexit, and so on and so forth. Which, by the way, Sir David Amess was one of those, enthusiastic Brexiteers who, in some ways, got
nationalist Brexiteer as
well. Of course,
and
as many of us are indeed.
Yeah.
But I mean, who got would have been one of the people who the influence was at that time. In other words, sometimes when these things happen, people have got their own political hobby horses. So I think it's avoiding Islamist terrorism. But it's more than that. I think that I understand this. A lot of MPs feel, a lot of politicians feel at the moment under the cosh. There is a great deal of cynicism about politics. A lot of the public, understandably, I think, look at the political elite and think, what have we just been through in the last 18, 19 months? They feel as though politicians are evasive, not answerable to them. And there is a lot of toxic, nasty stuff online. people feel it's not fair, I go out and do all the work and I keep getting all this abuse. But that's not an excuse to bring in legislation, which is what's being talked about in terms of anonymous tweeters. And we should remember the importance of anonymity, by the way. This is the basis on which you've just done a fantastic item, I love that, on facial recognition in schools. I'll tell you how I first heard about that when it was proposed about 4 or 5 years ago from an anonymous teacher or somebody in education who was a tweeter.
It's so important to expose those sorts of
whistleblowers, all sorts of democratic activists around the world who can't come out. But in this country, we have civil servants who want you to know what's going on. We have people who, let's be honest, there's so much cancel culture. If you work in certain professions, saying that you're gender critical could lose you your job or certainly get you a huge amount of hate. So people are anonymous. It doesn't matter what the reasons are. In a free society, you should be free to be anonymous.
Absolutely. And to some extent, I think that the best way to honour Sir David Amess would be to have more open discussions and talk about these issues more. That's how we confront threats like Islamism. By shutting down parts of the internet, by regulating this, that seems like totally the opposite way to go to try and prevent a tragedy like this in the future.
The other aspect of this is that when you actually say the problem is this online abuse and these anonymous abuse, and you keep talking about the public sphere not being civil, it's almost as though people are blaming the public for what happened to Sir David.
Yeah.
This is the guy who was an MP, absolutely loved the public, wanted to be open to his constituents, wasn't frightened of them, and I know that what happened, he paid for his life. But nonetheless, to somehow demonise the public as the kind of toxic problem, I think is a real insult to his memory, but also to ordinary voters who are not wandering around threatening to kill politicians all the time. I think it's why we were all so shocked when we saw Michael Gove being hassled on the street.
Yeah.
No matter what your politics, and I certainly don't like vaccine passports, and I'm a massive critic of Michael Gove in lots of ways. What you don't do is that kind of thing, but it's very rare. That's the point I'm making. And so to somehow demonise and suggest that the public is to blame.
And it happens in person so much more than online in terms of the actual really threatening things. I wonder if there's a civil society way to deal with this rather than a legislative way, and expectations.
Social norms are hugely important, and it seems to me that if the government sets a social norm as you ban anything as soon as it looks a bit threatening, that's actually the wrong message. And let's be entirely frank, most of the time that I get massive abuse online, God knows, and death threats and the rest of it, and horrible things said, usually activated by blue-tick, fully named opponents of mine who use their power to, set their trolls on me, right?
Yeah.
So it's not even dealing with the problem of online abuse, as it happens.
Well, Baroness Claire Fox, I absolutely have to say I agree with you on that. Thank you so much for bringing that experience and those and that analysis here to the briefing. We really appreciate it this morning on GB News. Now, COVID